836,000 square miles of North American territory sit under nominal Danish control right now. This massive island hosts just 57,000 people and virtually zero military defense capability whatsoever. Donald Trump described their entire defensive force with brutal accuracy: two dog sleds patrolling endless ice. $4 trillion worth of mineral resources lie beneath Greenland's frozen surface, waiting for extraction. Every single Russian missile trajectory to American cities passes directly through Greenland's airspace above. Every single Chinese ICBM aimed at Chicago or New York follows the exact same Great Circle route. Denmark controls this strategic territory from Copenhagen, which sits 3,500 kilometers away on a completely different continent across the Atlantic Ocean. The Danish military fields roughly 20,000 active personnel with an annual budget under $10 billion total. For context, the Chicago Police Department operates with comparable resources and defends a single American city. This is not about Trump's ego or real estate ambitions, despite what mainstream commentators constantly repeat. This is survival mathematics that geography professors teach in introductory courses at every major university. Greenland sits physically and tectonically on the North American continental plate, closer to Maine than to Denmark. China has quietly accumulated control over 69% of global rare earth production during the last 3 decades of patient strategic investment. Beijing now dominates 94% of permanent magnet manufacturing, the components that power every advanced weapon system in modern arsenals. These magnets go into F-35 fighter jets and Tomahawk cruise missiles and precision-guided munitions and submarine propulsion systems. In April 2025, Chinese officials imposed export restrictions on 7 critical rare earth elements without any warning to Western governments or corporations. The restricted elements include samarium and gadolinium and terbium and dysprosium, names most Americans have never heard, but materials that defense contractors desperately need. By October 2025, Beijing expanded those restrictions to cover 12 elements and banned processing equipment exports entirely to all foreign buyers. Western automakers immediately felt the impact when production lines halted due to magnet shortages across multiple facilities. Defense contractors scrambled to find alternative sources for materials they had purchased from Chinese suppliers for decades without interruption. The Department of Defense invested $400 million in MP materials, specifically to create domestic supply chain independence. The International Energy Agency documented the devastating implications in their October 2025 analysis very clearly. Even products manufactured completely outside China now require Beijing's export license approval to ship anywhere. If those products contain any Chinese-sourced rare earth materials, Beijing holds absolute veto power over delivery. Greenland contains 30 of the 34 minerals that European regulators classify as critical for modern industry. The Kvanefjeld deposit ranks as the 3rd largest known rare earth reserve on the entire planet Earth. Chinese company Shanghai Resources already holds a 12.5% ownership stake in that project today. Gracelyn Baskran directs the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She published a detailed January 2026 report that every serious analyst should read very carefully now. Her conclusion: China's dominant position in rare earth processing gives Beijing an advantage in accessing Greenland's resources through offtake agreements that technically comply with Western regulations while delivering effective Chinese control. Russia has systematically militarized the Arctic region for over a decade, with nuclear submarines and new bases. The Northern Fleet headquarters in Murmansk operates attack submarines within 100 miles of the Finnish border. Vladimir Putin personally traveled to Murmansk in March 2025 to launch a new Yasin-M nuclear submarine. Putin stated his position with characteristic bluntness during that ceremony for all the world to hear. The United States will continue advancing its geostrategic and military interests in the Arctic region indefinitely. He was simultaneously issuing a prediction and a warning and an acknowledgement of reality. Peter Zeihan ranks among the most influential geopolitical strategists working in the field today anywhere. His analysis revealed something deeply disturbing about Russian information operations targeting American audiences, specifically now. Kremlin propaganda actively promotes the idea of a joint American-Russian invasion of Greenland deliberately. The Russian strategy becomes clear when you understand their actual objective behind this propaganda campaign. They want America to seize Greenland, but they want America to do it destructively and unilaterally. An American invasion that shatters NATO would weaken the United States far more than losing Greenland hurts Denmark. The Trump administration pursues a smarter approach that maintains alliance relationships while asserting American strategic interests firmly. They pressure Denmark to recognize the obvious reality that Copenhagen cannot defend or develop Greenland alone. They offer financial terms generous enough for Danish politicians to save face with their domestic voters. Climate change accelerates these strategic calculations by opening Arctic shipping routes that remained frozen throughout recorded history until recently. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration projects regular commercial shipping through Arctic passages within coming decades as summer ice coverage declines measurably every single year. The Northern Sea route along Russia's coast already cuts shipping time from Shanghai to Rotterdam by 10 days compared to traditional Suez Canal routing. Russia and China signed formal agreements to develop the Northern Sea route together as a joint strategic and commercial venture. Chinese investment flows into Russian Arctic port facilities and icebreaker construction programs with increasing intensity annually. The Northwest Passage runs directly along Greenland's western coastline for thousands of miles northward toward the pole. Whoever controls Greenland controls the choke point where Arctic shipping connects to Atlantic Ocean commerce and naval operations. Any military vessel attempting to enter the Atlantic from Arctic waters must pass through straits that Greenland commands geographically. The Patuxent Space Base in northern Greenland has provided America's early warning radar since 1951 continuously. Those systems give American commanders 15 to 20 minutes warning before incoming nuclear missiles reach population centers. 15 minutes determines whether America launches interceptors or watches helplessly as warheads detonate over cities. Now let me prove this pattern of strategic necessity followed by vindication with 3 historical examples. America faced this exact situation 3 times before, and 3 times critics screamed about imperialism and waste and constitutional overreach, while history ultimately proved them catastrophically wrong. Secretary of State William Seward negotiated the Alaska Purchase from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million total. Newspapers immediately branded the deal Seward's folly and mocked him as a fool who bought worthless ice. The New York Tribune called Alaska a frozen wilderness that would never benefit American citizens in any way. What did America actually receive for that $7.2 million investment that critics ridiculed so viciously? Strategic positioning that permanently blocked Russian expansion into North America for all future generations of Americans. Early warning radar installations that provided critical minutes of warning throughout the entire Cold War period when Soviet missiles threatened American cities. 15 major military bases, including Elmendorf Air Force Base, that remain essential to American defense posture today. Oil reserves at Prudhoe Bay that produced over 17 billion barrels, worth hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue. When production peaked in 1988, Prudhoe Bay alone supplied nearly 25% of total American domestic oil production for years. Commercial fisheries that generate billions in economic value for American workers and coastal communities every single year, continuously. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Alaska's strategic value became immediately obvious to military planners everywhere. The Aleutian Islands campaign prevented Japanese forces from establishing a permanent North American foothold that could threaten the continental United States. When Soviet bombers tested American air defenses throughout the Cold War decades, Alaska's radar installations provided irreplaceable early warning continuously. The critics who laughed at Seward in 1867 disappeared into historical obscurity completely and permanently forgotten. Seward earned recognition as a visionary statesman who identified strategic necessity when others saw only frozen wasteland. Greenland in 2026 mirrors Alaska in 1867, with remarkable precision across every relevant strategic dimension. The geography is similar: vast frozen territory with enormous resource potential beneath the ice sheets. The strategic logic is identical: controlling territory that hostile powers could otherwise exploit against American interests. The critics make exactly the same arguments about waste and imperialism that their predecessors made unsuccessfully. President Thomas Jefferson negotiated the Louisiana Purchase with Napoleonic France in 1803 for $15 million. He acquired 827,000 square miles, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. Federalist opponents accused Jefferson of acting like a monarch and violating the Constitution with unauthorized expansion. What did America actually receive for that $15 million investment that critics denounced as tyrannical? Control of the Mississippi River, the economic artery that connected interior farmers to global markets through New Orleans. Permanent removal of French military forces from the North American interior, eliminating an existential European threat. Land that eventually became 15 American states, containing some of the most productive agricultural territory on Earth. Jefferson refused to wait for constitutional scholars to debate endlessly while strategic opportunity slipped away forever. He recognized that control of the Mississippi River determined whether the American Republic survived or fractured economically. He acted with the decisiveness that necessity demanded, and history vindicated his judgment completely and permanently. President Theodore Roosevelt wanted a canal connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans for obvious naval reasons. Colombia controlled Panama and rejected American terms, demanding more money and more control over operations. Roosevelt responded with characteristic boldness that critics condemned as piracy and lawless imperialism. He supported Panamanian independence activists who had sought separation from Colombia for decades already. He positioned American warships to prevent Colombian forces from suppressing the rebellion militarily. He recognized the new Republic of Panama within days and negotiated canal rights with grateful Panamanian officials. What did America actually receive from Roosevelt's supposedly imperialist aggression that critics condemned so loudly everywhere? The Panama Canal, which transformed global shipping patterns and remains strategically critical over a century later today. Control of the most important maritime choke point in the entire Western Hemisphere for American commercial and military vessels. Naval flexibility that proved absolutely decisive in both World War I and World War II. Before the canal existed, American warships traveling from New York to San Francisco sailed 13,000 miles around Cape Horn at South America's treacherous southern tip. The canal cut that distance to roughly 5,000 miles and reduced transit time from months to days. When German U-boats threatened Atlantic shipping in 1917, the canal enabled rapid naval reinforcement of convoy escort operations, saving countless Allied lives. When Japan attacked in 1941, the canal allowed America to fight a two-ocean war that would have been logistically impossible otherwise. Roosevelt reportedly said he took the canal zone and let Congress debate, while construction continued regardless. That captures the difference between leaders who understand strategic necessity and critics who mistake endless deliberation for wisdom. 3 territorial acquisitions across American history demonstrate the identical pattern with perfect clarity and consistency. Critics screamed about cost and constitutionality and international condemnation, each time with passionate intensity. History vindicated each acquisition and forgot the critics who opposed necessary action so vocally. Now let me address the objections that critics raise about Greenland acquisition with specific evidence and arguments. Critics argue that Denmark is a NATO ally, and pressure will destroy the Atlantic Alliance irreparably. But NATO was created to defend Western civilization against Soviet aggression, not to guarantee Danish sovereignty forever over strategic North American territory that Denmark cannot actually defend against serious threats. The 1951 Defense Agreement already grants America extensive rights to operate military facilities throughout Greenland freely. Peter Zeihan observed that Denmark has never once refused an American request regarding Greenland operations throughout their alliance history. What changes with American sovereignty? The flag changes and administrative paperwork changes, but practical arrangements remain identical. The United States paid Denmark $25 million for the Virgin Islands back in 1917 without destroying the alliance. That transaction removed a source of friction and allowed both countries to focus on more important shared interests. Critics argue that 85% of Greenlanders oppose American sovereignty, according to recent polling data. Those polls ask the wrong questions and miss the strategic reality that ordinary citizens rarely understand fully. Do Greenlanders want Denmark's two dog sleds defending them against Russian nuclear submarines patrolling Arctic waters? Do Greenlanders want Chinese mining companies controlling their rare earth deposits and using that leverage against Western nations? Do Greenlanders want Moscow ignoring Copenhagen's diplomatic protests while expanding Arctic military operations continuously? 57,000 people live in Greenland, while 334 million Americans depend on Arctic security. The Western Hemisphere's security architecture cannot depend on the preferences of a population smaller than most American suburbs. Strategic decisions affecting great power competition have never been made by popular referendum among small affected populations. Critics argue that Greenland's minerals are not worth extraction costs, and they cite Malte Humpert of the Arctic Institute, who called large-scale Greenland mining completely bonkers and compared it unfavorably to lunar mining operations. Humpert is correct about current conditions, 80% ice cover and zero infrastructure, and brutal climate extremes. But conditions change in ways that short-term analysis consistently fails to predict accurately over longer time horizons. The Arctic is warming faster than any other region on Earth, with measurable ice retreat every single year. Mining technology advances rapidly with autonomous equipment and remote operations and cold weather engineering improving constantly. China spent 3 decades building rare earth dominance through patient investment in places Western analysts dismissed as uneconomical. The question is not whether Greenland mining is profitable under current market conditions with existing technology. The question is whether America can afford Chinese control over those resources in 2040 or 2050 when conditions have changed and the window for American control has closed permanently. Critics argue that Trump pursues Greenland from personal ego rather than genuine strategic calculation based on national interests. Trump told the New York Times that owning Greenland feels psychologically necessary to him personally. Theodore Roosevelt's contemporaries considered him an egomaniac who needed conquest to prove his masculinity constantly. He built the Panama Canal that transformed global shipping and American naval capabilities permanently. Thomas Jefferson's opponents accused him of monarchical ambitions that betrayed Republican principles entirely. He purchased Louisiana and transformed America from a coastal nation into a continental power. Great leaders possess substantial egos. That characteristic drives them to seek power and accomplish transformational changes. The question is not whether Trump has ego, because every president who ever lived possessed enormous ego. The question is whether his ego points towards strategically correct objectives, and on Greenland it clearly does. What does this situation mean for investors positioning their portfolios for coming strategic shifts intelligently? Arctic resources are entering an entirely new strategic and economic era, with government backing across Western nations. Companies with Arctic mining expertise and cold weather infrastructure capabilities position themselves for generational growth opportunities. The U.S. Export-Import Bank sent a $120 million letter of interest for the Tanbreeze rare earth project already. The European Union designated the Amitsoq graphite project as a strategic project under critical raw materials regulations. Defense contractors building missile defense systems and Arctic-capable equipment will see substantially increased government demand soon. Trump's Golden Dome missile defense concept requires massive infrastructure investments that Greenland will inevitably host. Rare earth supply chains are restructuring fundamentally as Chinese export restrictions force Western companies to develop alternative sources. MP Materials received $400 million from the Department of Defense specifically to build domestic magnet production capacity. Any Western company processing rare earths outside Chinese control commands what analysts call a strategic premium. Trump has 4 years to intensify Greenland negotiations through purchase or lease or expanded security agreement mechanisms. American presence and influence in Greenland will expand substantially regardless of which specific mechanism ultimately prevails. Here's the final truth that separates people who understand historical patterns from those perpetually surprised by predictable events. Small nations do not get to block great power necessities simply because they hold legal claims and diplomatic support. Weak allies do not get to dictate security architecture simply because treaties recognize their formal sovereignty. International opinion does not stop missiles simply because editorial boards condemn military action as inappropriate. Spain believed it could hold the Americas forever, with the largest empire and most powerful navy and endless New World wealth. Britain believed it could hold Suez forever, with the largest empire in human history and centuries of global power management experience. In November 1956, a single phone call from Washington ended British imperial pretensions within 11 days completely. The Soviet Union believed it could hold Eastern Europe forever, with 30,000 nuclear weapons, and the largest land army and ideological certainty of historical inevitability. They ceased to exist within 900 days, not from military defeat, but from internal collapse and strategic overextension. They all confused paper ownership with practical control, and practical control with actual capability, and capability with permanence. Denmark owns Greenland on paper, with international law recognizing their sovereignty, and the United Nations ready to condemn changes. Denmark cannot control Greenland practically with their limited military forces and modest economic resources. Denmark has zero capability to defend Greenland against serious Russian or Chinese pressure now or in the foreseeable future. America purchased Louisiana when critics screamed about unconstitutional executive overreach, violating Republican principles entirely. America purchased Alaska when critics mocked Seward's folly as frozen wasteland that would never benefit citizens. America secured Panama when critics condemned Roosevelt as an imperialist pirate, trampling international law shamelessly. Every single time the critics were wrong and history vindicated the acquisition decision completely and permanently. Greenland represents the next chapter in this pattern, not because Trump wants a real estate trophy for his ego. Geography dictates the necessity, because missile trajectories do not negotiate with diplomats or respect legal boundaries. China positions systematically for control of Arctic resources through patient long-term investment and strategic partnerships. Russia militarizes the Arctic Ocean with nuclear submarines and new bases and expanded military exercises continuously. 57,000 Greenlanders cannot hold the security of 334 million Americans hostage to Danish national pride. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because you will want to see what comes next in this analysis. My next video will show specific investments positioned to benefit from Arctic development, with concrete company names and sectors. I will reveal why China's rare earth restrictions are accelerating American strategic positioning in ways Beijing did not anticipate. Drop a comment below and tell me your perspective. Should America control Greenland or not, and why? Alaska was Seward's folly in 1867, and today historians call it strategic genius that secured American interests permanently. Greenland is Trump's obsession in 2026, and the only question is what historians will call it in 2067. Critics are always loud and always confident and always wrong when strategic necessity collides with preferences for endless deliberation. Winners recognize necessity before the window closes and act with decisiveness that critics mistake for recklessness. The window's open and the necessity is clear, and the choice belongs to America.